You wanted the best. You've got the best podcast. The hottest podcast in the world. The Chris Voss Show, the preeminent podcast with guests so smart you may experience serious brain bleed. The CEOs, authors, thought leaders, visionaries, and motivators. Get ready. Strap yourself in. Keep your hands, arms, and legs inside the vehicle at all times, because you're about to go on a monster education roller coaster with your brain. Now, here's your host, Chris Voss.
Hi, folks. It's Voss here from thechrisvossshow.com. There you go. When the Big Iron Lady sings it, you know the show is officially on. So there you go. Welcome to the show, my big family and friends. As always, we have the most smartest and brightest minds on the show. The people that educate you, that make you smarter, that give you what we call the Chris Voss Glow. This up to an hour, 3 to 4 times a weekday, 15 to 20 shows a week we do, just like radio, old-timey radio, if you will. And we bring you the smartest minds, the billionaires, the CEOs, the White House presidential advisors, the astronauts, people from all walks of life. And they bring you their condensed version of all their juiciness of information and knowledge that you put it in your brain and your brain lights up and goes, oh my God, I don't know what your brain does because I'm not in your brain, but I'm making up as I go on. But you get the Chris Voss Show glow, and that's what it's all about. In fact, we were joking in the prior show that maybe we're going to call the Chris Voss Show fans the glowies or the globalies or something. I don't know. It has to do with the Chris Voss Show glow. Anyway, enough of that. The Chris Voss Show has finally, after 15 years, been sent to the principal's office, ladies and gentlemen. We have been bad. I don't know what we did, but that's usually what engaged in most of my principal visits to the office. But we are going to the principal's office today, and we're going to find out what it's all about and accept our punishment or whatever. It's not going to be punishment. It's going to be a great time. We're going to have a lot of fun. Elizabeth Bennett joins us on the show today. Her newest book is called Courageous Conversation. It came out November 22nd, 2022, and it's a guide for parents to understand and connect with their teens, assuming you want to or anything, but some of your teens I've seen, and I'm just like, I just get a restraining order, but there you go. So this is her wonderful book that she has out and helping parents with their teenagedom, not their personal teenagedom. Maybe they still have issues from that, but their children's personal teenagedom. This is probably giving them teenagedom problems. I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. Elizabeth Bennett is an esteemed retired principal, hence the principal's office reference, with 35 plus years in education, coaching, and administration. She's known as the Teen Genie, and she's positively impacted thousands of teenagers and their families. Elizabeth's mission is to transform adversity into love-filled spaces, reflected in her contribution to 8 best-selling books and her own guide, Courageous Conversations, a guide for parents to understand and connect with their teens. My side note, I'm assuming if you want to, I don't know, they're kind of weird and they smell bad sometimes. I'm just teasing. Her dedication to fostering positive change, one courageous conversation at a time, shines through with unwavering compassion and resilience. Welcome to the show, Elizabeth, or should I call you Principal Elizabeth?
No, Elizabeth's fine. Thanks, Chris.
There you go. You probably had 35 years of that. You probably have enough of that whole thing going on. So welcome to the show, Elizabeth. Give me your .coms so people can find you on the interwebs.
Courageousnetwork.com.
There you go. And on courageousnetwork.com and the book, give us, in your words, a 35,000 overview of what's inside.
Well, it really is about having connection.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that is my own journey through my own experience as a youth and then into teaching and so on. Mm-hmm. And really, it's about taking a look at how we show up for our kids and how they show up for us. Because we know that, every person has a background, and I always point back there, we have our traumas and experiences and the way we were raised and so on. And we need to understand that part of that, even though we think we've got it all under control and it's in the background and it's behind us, there's still a filter that shows up. And that's how we see things, and that's how we speak through things, and that's how we hear things, and that's how we show up for each other. And our kids have similar filters. And so part of the information that I share in the book is about being able to really have dedicated listening to each other. Because here's what happens. You and I are having conversation, or wherever that leads, and you say something and I have already 6 solutions to that problem, right? And so what we need to be able to do, and this is what I teach parents about, my 5 strategies of dedicated listening, is for them to be able to move their judgment out of the way and be engaged with their teen and invite them into conversation so that they understand what's going on in that teen's life. Because typically you'll get something like, and this is an honest question, a parent hasn't seen their kid all day and they say, "Hey, honey, how's it going? And how was your day?" And the typical 4-letter responses are fine, good, or, this other one that appears is either a grunt or, yeah, whatever, right? And so the parent says, "So what did you do all day?" And the kid says, "Nothing." "Well, what do you mean you did nothing? You were away for 8 hours," right? So there's that point of escalation for the parent, and the level of apathy is starting to show up for the kid. And so then up comes the hoodie, in go the earbuds, out comes the cell phone, and they're out of there. And really, both of them are left a little bit heartbroken because the teenager wants you to ask about them, not their day.
Oh, holy crap. Wow, that just blew my mind. I've always, it happens so often. It's kind of a meme or one of those things, it's kind of like a joke, a punchline, of the parents, the kid who comes home and what was their day like? The kid says nothing. But that's the whole, instead, because sometimes I remember being as a teen, it was about how'd you do today really meant like, hey, did you pass all your tests and you get good grades? And you're just like, oh man, you don't care about me, you just care about my grades. And they'd say yes. So that was that. But I don't know. That's probably a big problem with Chinese parents. Those tiger moms. They worry about the grades. But no, wow, that gives me just an epiphany that blows my mind. So what should the better questions be?
Well, it could start with that one. How was your day? But people, and that's the piece that people need to recognize is they've already been in that day for 8 hours. Just like you've been in your day for 8 hours, right? Yeah. And they need to have a pause from it. And
decompress, maybe?
That's right. And, either, you can sit and have a tea or a drink or a pop or whatever together, or they can take some time to decompress, if they want to change their clothes or go hang out for a bit and then come back and be invited into, so tell me what's going on. Like I've noted, and then you can address things as you see them. So if you see your teen, sort of with a mopey face, or they've been grumpy or grouchy or so on, then you can identify that and say something like, I've noticed that you've been a little bit out of sorts these days. And if you choose a word and it's not the right one, they will certainly tell you. So, you just try another one and say, well, you just look a little out of sorts. So tell me what's going on.
Yeah. Ask about them.
And then that's why I call it courageous conversations, because we need to step out of our comfort zone and be a little bit more vulnerable in that space that's a little bit out there. We're not sure which direction it's going to go in. But if we're in the space of compassion at the same time to say, look, I just want to know what's going on because I haven't seen you lately, or, I noticed that your friends aren't coming around. What's going on there? So that there's a different space, and that it's not about judgment, and it's not about us coming up with solutions or ideas for, what we think they need to be doing, but rather and that's why I emphasize the piece about invitation, because it's can we come and sit down, and then being able to say, I've noticed that I have been, so now you're taking on responsibility for your actions too, to say, I recognize that I've been annoyed with you lately because I've asked you 6 or 7 times to do something, and it appears that it takes you that long maybe to do it or not.
Mm-hmm.
And I get that it must have an impact on you too, so that you're recognizing where they are as well.
This is pretty amazing. Do you find, I want to ask you about your history and stuff, but to a quick question before it escapes me. Is this one of the challenges that parents have, is they still think that they're talking to a child that they need to instruct or problem solve for, and they haven't somehow, realized that this is now a burgeoning adult. Is burgeoning the right word? A new adult. And there's a whole different sort of gameplay here where you're not really babysitting them anymore, trying to make sure they don't fall over when they're walking around your thing. It's a whole different sort of dynamic. Is it maybe people haven't clicked that over in their heads or something?
Well, I think part of it really comes from the place of how they were raised. Oh. And as much as we all try to say, oh, we're going to be very different than how our parents were, I think there's still that background and still some of those elements that sneak into your space as an adult, as a parent, right? So, there are still people that think that the only way to raise children is to be an authoritarian. It's my way or the highway, that kind of thing. And they're not willing to even depart or open a different kind of conversation, because for them, there's fear about losing control.
Yeah.
And so the more they do that, the more control their child steps up with, because now they're resistant to what you're saying and what you're doing, and they don't give a shit, that kind of idea.
Yeah.
And so they're going to really collide with each other. Whereas if there's a space of saying, look, this really isn't working as well as we'd like it to. And I get that I'm frustrated. And so I start yelling and getting annoyed with you, and you do a similar kind of thing. And it appears not to be working for either of us. So how can we, and this is the invitation piece, how can we work together to do things differently? Because everybody has a contribution to making this house work differently.
There you go. You know how I found to fix all these problems with kids and teenagers? I just sent my kids as soon as they were born to military school, and they get one call a year, and then they get to see me when they're 18. Although I've moved several times on purpose, so and faked my death at least once. So there you go. So tell us a little bit about your upbringing and your journey. How'd you become a principal? What made you interested in this sort of stuff, and teaching and helping parents with their teenagers?
Well, I wanted to be a teacher when I was in 3rd grade, because I liked that teacher so much, and I thought, yep, this is one of the things I wanted to do. Well, I had 3. I had 3 things I wanted to do. I wanted to be a police officer, I wanted to be a flight attendant, and I wanted to be a teacher. So at that point in time, I was, there was some rules or regulations about height and so on. And because I'm not 6'3", only in my brain, I didn't fit the qualifications for those other 2. So I just continued along that space. Now, backing that up to asking about what my background was, I came from a tumultuous background. There was domestic violence. There was alcoholism. There was sexual abuse. And so I tried my best to stay away from what was going on in that environment and to give to people. So when I was in high school, I got involved with charity things, collecting food bank items or giving to the church or doing some kinds of things, because I felt that was at least a positive escape for me and I could give to others. And I also grew up, I was born a couple of minutes ago. And I think at that point in time, it was like, children should be seen and not heard. Money doesn't grow on trees. Don't cry or I'll give you something to cry about. Boys don't cry, and those kinds of things of that time. And also of that time, everything was secretive. So I didn't have anybody else to speak to about stuff that was going on, because I didn't know how. And I also technically wasn't allowed, right? Because you had to keep those things at home. And I was also an only child too, so I didn't even have anybody to share that with in my home. But as I went along my journey and I, went to school, I was first in the field of education or recreation. And then I did some work in community development and so on with grassroots organizations. And then I went into education. So when I started with that as a teacher and then even as a beginning administrator, as an assistant principal, I was noticing more and more things with kids having issues with bullying and name calling and really rude, crude, and socially unacceptable kinds of things that were going on. So having those conversations in class and giving, demonstrating to kids how they could speak differently, how they could do different things. And then partway through my journey, I thought, I'm going to find the silver bullet to ending all of this, right? I'm going to be rich and famous. I'm going to write a book. I'm going to have the ultimate solution for stopping this bullying thing. And so I did some work around it. I helped to create in a community for them to strive to be bully free and with the schools and so on. But then it sort of lost its way, as with new leaders in town halls and so on. Those things get, the lovely things of the moment get cast aside, and it's not anybody's fault. It just is what it is. Yeah. And I moved schools too, and so there wasn't that same kind of connection within that community. But what I recognized along that journey and having more conversations with kids and having more conversations with parents saying, I don't know how to connect with my kid. I don't know what to say to them. I don't know what they're doing. I'm really afraid for them because everything is getting to be much bigger and scarier in the world.
Yeah.
And that's when I recognized that really it's about community and it's about connection. It's about relationship. And it's about everybody working together. This isn't a one person's solution thing, but this is having people recognize and be part of making the change together. And that's why I'm on this bigger mission about getting to schools and getting to families and having this be a place where we need to stop bullying, but it's up to us to make that happen.
Yeah. I tell people if they don't stop bullying, I'm going to punch them in the face. No, don't do that. That's just a joke, people. We do jokes on the show. Don't write me. But no, I like how you have this courageous conversations. And it's tough. I remember I played pseudo stepdad. I was engaged, so I played pseudo stepdad with two young kids of a gal that I was dating. And I remember when the son turned 11 or 12-ish, it was kind of sometimes weird and hard to watch him, develop his ego, I guess you call it. You correct me if I'm wrong because you're the pro here. But, he would kind of, sometimes he'd say things, like he'd say something really offensive. And then he'd have this like really smart ass and offensive to us. And then he'd have this look on his face like, did that just come out of my mouth? And he'd be like, you could tell he was sorry. But just watching him kind of fumble through trying to figure out who he was and develop. And I remember one of my friends who worked for me told me a lot of great advice over the years. And one of the key advices he told me is you gotta give kids a hallway, but it's gotta be a good sized hallway. You gotta let them bounce around and hit the walls. There has to be some structure there, but you got to give them room. You can't just try and force them to walk the straight and narrow. And but yeah, it's a hard time for kids. They're trying to develop who they are and what they're about, and what the world is, and boys and girls they're interested in. So there's that whole thing going on.
Well, usually when I start a talk that I give and I say, I absolutely love teenagers. I love their piss and vinegar attitude. I love their raging hormones. I love everything about them. However, probably parents don't. And parenting is like riding a roller coaster blindfolded.
Oh, yeah.
With ups and downs and twists and turns and, moments of sheer exhilaration and moments of absolute horror and terror for their kids. But here's what really is happening in their world. Bullying is rampant. Mental health concerns are through the roof. Social isolation. As wonderful as our cell phone is to gather information, it's also a place of social isolation because kids are diving into their cell phones looking for acknowledgement. They're looking for their likes. They think that there's a perfect virtual world in there, and we know it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And now, based in North America alone, just Canada and the United States, suicide is the second cause of death of teens, and kids as young as 8 and 9 are taking their lives because they see, they're choosing a permanent solution to a temporary problem, because most of the time the things that they are concerned about are really, we slough them off and say, oh, don't worry about it, honey. My mother used to say that to me. Don't worry about it, honey. Just go to school, do your best, make some friends and so on. Except she didn't know that I didn't go to the bathroom all day during the day because there were bully girls in the bathroom.
Oh, wow.
There were kids that were selling drugs and they were trying to pawn them off on everybody. I mean, there was lots of things going on at that time. And now, kids have enormous pressures, some of which they place on themselves because they can't see and they don't have the strategies and tips and tricks that they need to have in order to be able to see the bigger picture. Because, some of the things that impact them now are, am I wearing the right shoes? Do I have the right clothes on? Is the color of my hair the right color for today? And do I have friends? Do I not have friends? My hormones are raging. Am I sleeping? What's going on with this test? Do my parents want me to do well? Do they even care if I do well? And then, love and hate and anxiety and pressure and all those things. And they carry that all the time, Chris.
Yeah.
It's like carrying a backpack with, 25 rocks, and each rock has one of those issues on it. And they carry that all the time. And they don't know how to express those feelings and concerns. So they don't know how to ask for help from home.
Yeah. And so it's good that you're bridging the gap for that. I think about, it's 10 or 13 states right now have filed a massive lawsuit against social media companies because of the impact they're having on young kids. A couple of the social media companies got away with I know TikTok did over the 13 and older rule. I know Facebook got away with it for years, where they weren't, supposed to be having kids on their platforms that weren't 13 over without parental consent. But the impact that it's having in the fantasy world, that I think Instagram is the worst, especially for young girls, teaches is so insidious. You have people, we have people down in LA, they can go down for $60 or $120 and they can take a picture in a studio that makes it look like they're on a private plane. It's just a cutaway plane studio. And they can pretend like they're influencers and, this whole fake it till you make it thing. And so the fear of missing out and the pressure of like, well, this guy's 20 and he's, drinking at private planes, and then women, Instagram is just an incredible crazy place where everything's hanging out. It used to be when I was a kid, there was certain corners you'd drive by and you'd be like, wow, that's interesting, there's a lot to see there. Now on Instagram it's everywhere, and I think it causes the kids to like, do I have to compete with that? Do I have to let everything hang out? Do I have to, try and have the jet plane and, all this stuff? Yeah.
Well, and we know full well too. We've seen actors and, entertainers and so on who have taken their lives. Yeah. And we've only seen the good side of their life, right? We see them in movies. We see them in, when the Grammys come or the Oscars or whatever, and they're all dressed to the nines and everything else, but we don't see behind the scenes, nor should we always have to. But that's the disconnect for kids when they only see that, that plane, or they, see the flashy cars, and, because you can stand beside a Ferrari. I have a picture standing beside a Ferrari too at the local gym, and I know the guy, but, that was just for fun. But there's that disconnect in what they believe has to be important.
Mm-hmm.
So there was an advertisement, wasn't very long ago, on Facebook, and it was about this young woman or this young girl who, you see her sort of life cycle very quickly in the commercial. And, she's playing with her dolls and so on. And then she gets to, I think, 11 or 12, and she gets a cell phone, and it's the biggest deal. And, and then it cuts to the next piece where her face is in it all the time. And her mother says to go and do something. And, she rolls her eyes like typical girls would. And I think they've been practicing that since grade 2. And then you see this young girl looking at her phone, and she's listening to someone on there tell her that she has to, she can't eat certain things, and she has to measure her weight, and she has to. And so then it leads to anorexia, and you see this young woman in a care center with a, medical bracelet on, and the sign says anorexic clinic. And then, that young woman with her mother, and then another young woman with her mother, and so on, saying, they've been in recovery for 6 months or 8 months or so on. And it's just a really fabulous demonstration about what happens and the kinds of misconceptions that kids get themselves involved with.
Yeah.
That we need to start having more conversations with them about that, right?
I totally agree. And I think one of the problems is, correct me if I'm wrong, is not only are the kids got their heads stuck in that phone, the parents do. Like, I remember when the iPads first came out and, phones really started catching on with everybody, with the iPhone, I would go out to dinner and I would see like whole families, 2 parents, 2 kids, and they'd all be looking into their individual phone and just eating. And it was like watching cows, just docile cows looking at their phones. And so, the parents are distracted too and off on their own planet. I have a friend who's got 2 or 3 young daughters, and they're that teenage, preteen, teenage, 12ish, 13, I think. And he has to almost sit down with them daily and explain things they're seeing on Instagram and go, honey, this isn't real. These people are, what they're putting up is fake. There's a lot of posing and, stuff like that going on. It's very LA-ish, if you will. And so he constantly has to do that. He constantly has to try and maintain their reality based upon, what they see, in the Kardashians and, these girls who buy these purses and, they're flying off to Dubai and, he has to explain what that's all about. And he says it's a constant battle. It's a real struggle.
Please tell him he's doing an outstanding job, because lots of parents don't engage. I had a conversation just recently with a family, and I had suggested to them that they have conversation with their daughter about the whole idea that she's continually in her phone, and they have given her the opportunity to be responsible and independent. And I delicately said that, yes, you pay the bill though. And if anything were to happen, because I've certainly had police officers come into the schools that I've been in and have conversations with kids about, cybersecurity and about, being and we teach it too about being a responsible digital citizen. And that we don't want what we say on our cell phone to be the title of the newscast that night.
That's true. Yeah. Or worse. I mean,
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you and I were lucky. We grew up in an age where there's no record of what pretty much, except for my prison record of 20 years. I don't know. People are like, "You went to prison? Everything makes sense now." No, I never went to prison, people. But there was no record of anything we did. So, when we threw the baseball through the window, I think I did that once. It's not memorized for all of eternity, although I just did. And so it was kind of better. The other big thing that I see, especially with young women and actually middle-aged older women, is a real caught up in the attention and validation thing.
Yep.
And that's always been important for women, attention and validation, especially for men, to go, oh, men think I'm good looking. It's part of our whole propagation of the species operandi. But I've seen this addiction to where it's addicted. Some people are addicted to so many men that they can't pair bond. They can't get in. I've seen them talk about it on TikTok, right? I can't fall in love anymore. I can't fall in love with one guy because I'm so addicted to having all these guys' attention. And, I used to see that with strippers and strip clubs. But now it's like wholesale. It's like everywhere. And it's really become, I think, an addiction. The attention, the validation, which you mentioned before, the likes, and I think the kids get sucked into that too, where they're like, am I not accepted? And I'm not part of the in crowd, the kids are always into, if I'm not getting the likes, if I'm not getting those likes as much as Barbara or Jerry and, whatever. So it's a crazy world with these phones. It really is.
Well, and that's the place too where parents need to be able to set some guidelines around that. Mm-hmm. So as part of my 5 strategies of dedicated listening, one of them is the whole idea of having intentional time. Mm-hmm. And so if you have one or more children, then you need to have some of that time that you spend just with one at a time. And really? It doesn't mean going out, all day or, mm-hmm. These don't have to be all day affairs, but they need to be time because as you know, even having, kids around you and your friends who have children, mm-hmm. they all have different personalities. And even if they live in the same house, they see things and they hear things differently and they just show up differently. And so it's really important to have that time. But having said that, the piece about the dedicated time is that means that you need to put down your cell phone. You need to close your laptop. You need to shut off the television or the video games or whatever it is and do something outside of that space. So mm-hmm. if that means driving in the car, because many people have said to me that seems to be a really great place for them to have conversation.
So put them in the trunk and just start driving?
Maybe. You might want to start there and then, invite them to sit in the back seat or
they are teenagers.
But
I think that's legal.
The piece about that is that you're close enough and you're far enough away. So each of you have your personal space or your personal bubble, depending on, what people think about that. And that even if your kid puts his or her feet up on the dashboard, you can clean that later. And about looking at you, it's not about that. Like my father used to always say to me, look at me when I'm speaking to you. And I get that, but that's not what this is about. This is about connection. This is about having conversation. This is about being in a different space to be able to listen to what's going on. Mm-hmm. Now, I get that, oftentimes parents don't know how to start those conversations. Mm-hmm. And so I might suggest that, and I often do, suggest this, that rather than asking how they are and getting involved with that at the moment, you might consider saying something like, listen, I just listened to this podcast today, or I saw this news article, or I was listening on the radio, or whatever about a current event and about something that's away from them so they don't feel like they're being interrogated.
Yeah, that spotlight where you're like, tell us where you hid the money.
It doesn't need to be there first because what they're also doing is reestablishing trust. Because oftentimes in family dynamics and relationships, there isn't that, right? Because, they've been battered by something like, how come you haven't done this again? And that kind of talk. And so when you get to move all of that aside and really talk about something different. So, if you were the president or the leader of one of these countries that happens to be at war at the moment, what would you do differently or what would you do, right? And then the space that you have to be in is to allow for that silence.
To listen too, huh?
Yes, because here's the big piece. We're really good at coming up with solutions or answers or stuff right away, and we hate the silence.
And silence is okay. It's a great way to build intimacy sometimes.
Well, yes.
It's a great
And
way to
what
listen.
you're doing is you're building intimacy with your kid.
Yeah.
So you have to refrain from saying, oh, well, I wouldn't say that or I wouldn't do that, but rather say something like, wow, I hadn't thought of it from that perspective. Tell me more.
Yeah. Plus, you're helping your kid think about things and
Yes.
view the world from a bigger, different thing. I love these ideas. One of my friends, I don't know what a lot of my friends do with their kids. But I know one of my friends, they have younger kids that, they really like their devices but they make it a point of going out for long walks with the kids. The device has to stay home and they get out in nature and they just walk and, they get the grumbling and all that sort of stuff, but eventually the kids get into it. But they're teaching their kids that, there's a world outside of these phones. And I think a lot of parents, I don't know, I'm not a parent, but my assumption is from what I see is that, people like us in our generations, when we grew up, we had the world. And so when phones came along, we're like, well, this is kind of nice. Yeah, it's interesting, but we got this cool world thing going on. But yeah, this is kind of nice. But for these kids, they've grown up with this thing. And we've actually had one of the other things we've had on the show is we've had, I forget what kind of science, but they're brain scientists. And the one thing they talk about is we can't handle this 2D screen. We're used to seeing three-dimensional faces and interacting, and our brains are used to getting data. So when I'm looking at someone and talking to them, I'm seeing how their eyes move, their facial structure, their body language, and I'm getting all this data. And that's real important for my brain to have in engaging my brain, engaging their brain, and just learning this communication style of interacting with human beings, which you have to do in the world. You can't just walk around like this all day long at work. Or boss won't like it, maybe. I don't know, unless you do social media for him or something. But it's really important, and it helps develop our brains as well by seeing 3D visuals of people and everything else. And this really mucks with us, not to mention the blue light and, the fact that you can't sleep. If, the worst thing I can do is turn on my phone in the morning when I'm out, or in the middle of the night when, I'm like, oh, I'll check those notifications, and then yes, the blue light hits you, and you're like, oh, I'm awake now, And so it's a lot of this going on. So you got different techniques that people use. There was a question I had for you. How to create more formative school connections. Now, is that for the parents to get more involved in school, or is that for the kids?
It's more for the parents, and the reason I say that is because oftentimes, parents don't know what to do, and they're hearing the information from their kids, about, I'm being bullied, or this is going on, or so on. And so the parent comes in red hot and demands that things be done. And it's not our nature to be against each other. Schools are really making or trying to make an effort to be in connection with parents, because we're both after the same thing. We both want our children to be successful. And so this is really about getting some skills and strategies to be able to go into the school mindfully and say things like, I've been having conversation with my child, and these appear to be the situations that are happening at the moment. Can we work together to find out what's going on? Because, from time to time, there are situations that we don't know anything about in the school. We don't know what's been happening with your child because your child hasn't been sharing it with anybody. Because it happens because they're trying to work it out themselves. And sometimes they feel, and particularly in bully situations, they feel like if they report it to somebody, then it's going to be worse. And my suggestion to that is, yes, let's report it so that we can help that child who's also the bully. Because we've all heard this phrase about hurt people hurt people. So
That's
we
true.
need to be able to help that child as well. Because if there's stuff that's going on in his or her life, what they're trying to do is to get that hurt away from them. So they'll shoot it on anybody else that's around them.
Yeah.
So we need to dive in from both sides to help your child because your child is being bullied, and to help that other child as well to say, what can we do to help support this child and maybe perhaps their family if there's a, dysfunction, or there's stuff going on, or the child has lost somebody and they don't know how to deal with it, and they don't know who to speak to, and they don't know that they could get some help.
There you go. You're so right. Hurt people hurt people. Which explains most of my relationships and why I'm single. I'm just kidding. There's probably somebody who's like, yeah, that's true. But I remember one episode that I had that did land us in the principal's office was we were getting bullied by these twins, and they were I think a grade or two over us, and they would push us into lockers, and they were just really mean and vicious, and I don't know why they took a shine to us, but they did, and it was two twins, and so we finally had an episode where we just had enough of it. We got to the principal and said, this something has to be done here. And we were just kids. We didn't even tell our parents. And so the principal got involved and, got these guys pulled together. And he later told us, he says they're being beaten up at home by their parents. So they were going by their dad. I think their dad was just physically abusive to them. And so, it was just being passed down through the thing. I remember, my mom taught for, I think 20, 25 years. And I remember she talked about how it went from, it used to be to when parents would come in, they would listen to her, and she was the authority on, what was going on with the kids and the school and stuff like that. And then the model slowly flipped over time where parents really kind of expected teachers to like basically raise their kids and be their parents for them. They would show up and, why isn't my kid passing his test? This is your fault. And it's like, no, your kid isn't studying or doing their homework, and they're just mucking about because, I don't know, maybe you're not being a good parent at home, and, it's not our fault, but I mean, we can't, and then the participation generation kicked in, and, all that stuff. And it just became really hard to be a teacher and I imagine a principal in schools.
Well, it's even more challenging now because of the diversity in a classroom. And by the diversity, I mean, special needs, different kinds of cultures, language challenges, kids who are having a challenge just even being in that grade. And then, then you have the other end of the spectrum where kids are doing really well, but they're not being paid attention to either. And the expectation is just to give them more stuff because they're smarter so they can do more things. And that's not where it is. And then, the teachers have way more responsibility now in terms of, filling in forms and doing everything with less services. Yeah. And that's really part of the challenge in each, whether you're in a province, because I come from Canada, or whether the United States, because I do some work there, things are getting to be so heavy for teachers. And so, they're burning out too, because they are the giving kinds. The majority of folks that are in any profession are really the giving kind, right? And so they want the best for the children, and they're going to coach them, and they're going to, go off to their team events or dance or drama or whatever the activity is. And they're giving and giving all the time. And yet that's oftentimes the response they get is, what have you done for me and my kid lately? And there needs to be a balance there, because that's part of a parent responsibility too, is to be able to say, how can I help my kid at home with what they're doing or not doing, and not in an aggressive kind of way, because that doesn't work either. And that's why I talk about courageous conversations, because we need to change that. We need to disrupt the old behavior and the old attitude and come in with it differently. But that doesn't mean, because this is often where sometimes people get a little confused. Oh, well, then it's wishy-washy and I let them do everything. No, because part of what I hear quite frequently, and it's frightening for me when I hear this so often, is, oh, well, my kid is my best friend. It's like, are you kidding me? Like, there needs to be let them be your friend when they're 30, where you can sit and have a drink with them, have dinner, reminisce about your life, and have a good time and enjoy each other. But right now, they need those guidelines. They need that safety net so that they know that there's safety for them. So that if they've had a terrible kind of day or week or month or year, they know that their home is a safe place. But that's not happening quite as frequently because we often get kids who feel that their school is safer than going home.
And the scary part is here in America, it's not because, with the school shootings, that's another thing these kids are dealing with that I never had to deal with. The worst horror I had was, hiding under the desk from the nuclear bombs from Russia.
Yes, yeah.
And that was it. There was nobody coming into school or school lockdown practices. Here in America, we got some real problems, and I can't imagine going to school every day worrying about what I worried about in school is nothing compared to what these kids are worried about. But I like how you re-engaged the way to have conversation with them, and based on your experience of 35 years of being a principal, and I imagine having to talk to kids and figure out what's going on with them and try and help them has really given you a lot of great data that you put into this book and into the coaching you do as well. Tell us a little about the coaching and what opportunities people can have to reach out to you, schedule a call with you. Looks like you've got some events on your website as well.
So I currently have a 12-week program that I do that's called, I renamed it. I called it 90 Days to Connection, but really it's about bridging the gap. And that's one element. I have the opportunity as well to do a VIP so that if a family is really wanting to accelerate that help because they've been trying to do it by themselves for so long and they want an opportunity to be able to spend 2 or 3 days together and really focusing on what goes on. And that includes the children as well, so that they get a chance to be engaged with these conversations, to understand each other's perspective. Then I do that as well. And I also do, individual coaching if people feel that's something that they would prefer, because sometimes people just don't feel comfortable in group settings, because my 12-week program is designed as a group, and then it moves into a year if people are interested in continuing along with that.
And would you say the best advice is don't wait till things really get ugly? Try and be preventative, take preventive support to this. When you reach a point, I remember I got with my parents where I didn't want to talk to them at all or have anything to do with them. Was a rebellious teenager. Although I really wasn't that rebellious compared to what goes on nowadays. I was actually pretty tame looking back. But, they were ultra religious, so they didn't really appreciate, me listening to AC/DC and Van Halen and, all that. And, the goat sacrificing and stuff that I was doing in my room with the satanic whatever. I don't know. But, we had a tough time with us as teens. We did. And, it just reached a point that it was just broken. There's just no repairing it. So I think that's a great PSA message to people. Get help, seek help, and reach out before it gets to be too late. Your kid's dressing as an emo and I don't know, whatever. I probably shouldn't shame that. There's probably some, I don't know. Is there anything good that comes out of emos?
It was of a time, right? And it's, yeah.
Don't let your kid listen to The Cure. Come on, man. I'm a Metallica fan.
Although I wrote this book focused on teens because I love them so much and I spend the majority of time with them, these conversations can start when kids are 5. And we can be still having conversations like this when we're 55, because the book I'm writing now is called Courageous Conversations in the Workplace, because we know these similar kinds of things occur in workplaces, and people also don't feel like they have anybody to speak to, or that their voice is valued, or that they have any meaning or purpose in their workplace. And then what happens with that is they take it home.
Yeah, I think we need this because we've been trying to figure out how to tell Bob to quit cooking fish in the microwave every day. So, especially on tuna fish Saturday. I don't know, I'm just making shit up. So there you go. But this is really great and insightful. I'm glad you provide this thing. Maybe I should just get some cards from you so I can pass them on.
I'd be delighted to do that. In fact, the card that I do have that I give to people gives them the 5 strategies of dedicated
Oh,
listening.
really? There you go. There you
Yeah,
go.
it's an extra large business card, but it works for me.
There you go. Is one military school one of those? No, it's not.
No. No, I think that was one of your strategies.
Well, it was, but I just opted for that. I went out for milk one day and never came back. So I'm going to read your book, and then once I find whatever address they're living at now, I might come back with the milk. I don't know how that works, but thank you very much for coming on the show. We really appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun, Elizabeth, and I'm glad I'm not in further or any trouble or any punishment. Is there any punishment that needs to be bestowed on me from the principal's office today?
No, I don't think so. I think we've had a good conversation about it. I think you have mended your ways, and you're off to at least making an effort to do good things.
I'm making an effort. Yeah, that's about it. Thank you very much, Elizabeth. .com, your .com one more time as we go out.
Courageousnetwork.com.
There you go. Thanks so much for tuning in. Order up the book wherever fine books are sold. You can get it on Amazon and all those great places. Courageous Conversation by Elizabeth Bennett. Available November 22, 2022. And I love the concept of the new book, because please come back for that, because, I need to figure out how to have better comment. There was almost a fight that broke out in the Senate today between a senator and someone doing a witness. I don't know if you've seen that video yet, but maybe. And then there was I think a elbow kidney thing from the old Speaker of the House, McCarthy, and somebody else. So maybe after you do the book on business and how to, not get into fights there, you can do one for Congress or something. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I'd certainly like to do that, because the piece seriously, because our youth are seeing that.
Yeah.
They're seeing the dysfunction in leadership, and we need to be able to change that.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's been fights in the Senate and the Congress before, but like the 1800s or something. Like, to see someone was just doing some redneck sort of trailer park in the Senate, and they're like, oh, we'll fight you right here, and got up, and I guess Bernie Sanders had to jump in. You don't want Bernie Sanders settling you're trying to, I don't know, do fights. So yeah, we need to just all be better to each other. And you're right, kids don't need this as a thing. So there you go, folks. Go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss, linkedin.com/Chris Voss. See the big 130,000 group on LinkedIn, the LinkedIn newsletter, Chris Voss, Facebook.com, and Chris Voss 1 on the Tickety Talkie. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Be good to each other. Stay safe, and we'll see you guys next time.